series of guests that are coming to our Architecture 516 representation course. It's coordinated by me this semester and by Ellie Abrons next semester, and the teaching team includes Peter Hallquist and Catherine Griffiths. Today we are joined by Farzin Lotfi-Jam. He's an architect in New York. He teaches at Columbia's GSAP, also at the Cooper Union. He is a graduate of GSAP. He was one of the fellows here several years ago now. His work largely deals with, let's call it networks and surveillance. And as you can tell, we have a kind of unusual format for you today. I'm going to let Farzin introduce it more, but it seemed appropriate given the nature of his practice that we have a lecture delivered via the technological networks of surveillance that we all engage in every day. So on your screen, you're going to see a dash cam from a car, Farzin's live location in Google Maps, me, Ellie, the Zoom chat, and the flight tracker, which needs to be refreshed. But I'm going to let Farzin jump in and introduce a little bit more about the lecture and about the format. We'll get it going.
Hi, Ron. So lovely to be here with you, and thank you so much to Tom and to Ali and to Ishan for setting this up. It's so exciting to be back at Taubman after all these years. When we started to talk about this talk with Ali and with Tom a few months ago, I was also in late discussions with my mother-in-law and my father-in-law to visit them, and somehow only one of those things got inserted into my Google Calendar. And so in a very exciting way, I'm actually on the way to the airport now to fly and visit some family. But we also thought that rather than rescheduling, this could be a really interesting opportunity to conduct an experiment where we get to track me as I am moving through the physical geographies of northeastern America towards JFK Airport to meet my flight. But at the same time, I'm also moving through the informational geographies of different digital platforms that we are aware of, platforms that are ubiquitous, platforms that are both here for commercial and entertainment and other forms of tracking of humans within them, but also like large populations as an aggregate. So that's what's kind of happening here. You're going to see me as I move through these spaces, and some of my work will talk about that. I might drop out at some times. We're not sure. We have a pre-recorded video from a couple of hours ago that we're going to play that's going to talk about some of my work. But I also reserve the right to talk over the top of myself because some of what I was saying, maybe I could have said it better. So, part of my work is also really interested in the sort of the value of liveness within digital platforms. And so here we have multiple types of media being presented to you at once, and there's a sort of a live component that somehow holds that all together rather than giving you something that's pre-recorded. And I think it's really in line with the sort of amazing work that you're all doing in this representation course. That's kind of broadcasting architecture through Twitch and thinking about the value of that format. So I'm just gonna let it go now, unless there's anything else you think I should say, Tom or Ali.
No, that's great. Should we give credit to the driver who's managing all of this?
Yeah. And so the big shout out to my partner Caitlin, who's driving and listening in on all this. And you might sometimes hear the navigation system also tell us where we're going, and we're not quite yet. Like, it's a pleasant. You can see it's a pleasant drive right now, but I think as we hit New York, it might get a little bit more busy. So I'm excited to navigate all of this with you in real time.
All right, cool. Thanks, Farzin. Yeah, let's get the video going. And thanks again to Ishan for making not just this one happen, but all of these happen. So Awesome. Thank you, Ishan.
I run a small practice called Farzin. I teach at the Cooper Union at Columbia University. And my practice and academic research examine how new media, network infrastructures, and technological ideologies inflect the politics of architecture in the city. And so today I'm just going to show you some projects and show you how through my practice I've developed an applied research methodology where I actively theorize the implication of technology through critical form making. And so today I will present recent research and projects that use new spatial media to visualize and simulate how algorithms, models, and notions of real-time govern urban life. I'll be looking at the history of real-time computational systems and infrastructures and how complex environments, inhabitants, and their behaviors and relations have been theorized, virtualized, and modeled through digital simulations in military and commercial industries in an area of study that's sometimes referred to as the military entertainment complex. And then I want to look at how this has all been converging in the last 2 decades on the city with the emergence of a computational urbanism, a term that I've developed through collaborative projects with Marcus Suter, through research that we've been doing recently into 2 smart cities, and how cities and their residents are modeled as information, and how as subjects of the city, they have habituated to something, to a computational logic, to what we've been calling a computational governmentality. And then I want to conclude by reflecting on what this means for the fields of digital studies, architecture, and urbanism, and thinking about it through my own practice. But I want to start here. And I want to begin with these 2 recent forms of media, and they both show the movement of bodies, but in different ways. To the left, we have a recent data-driven narration of the coronavirus from the New York Times. The story consists of analysis and narration of cell phone data that informs a computer simulation of hundreds of millions of people's movement. To the right, we have the trailer for Humanity, a soon-to-be-released PlayStation 4 game by Enhance and THA, where population management has truly become entertainment. I'm interested in these 2 media because they demonstrate 2 historically distinct techniques for modeling and simulating population behavior, one driven by statistical information and the other by theories of human behavior. What this shows is how modeling algorithms are able to track subjects and use this data to model behavior, thus deploying anticipation as a technique to shape both subjects and territories. This anticipatory logic is what I'm examining in my current work. And so a project I've been working on with Greg Schleusner, who's the Director of Innovation at HOK and student researchers at the Cooper Union, which is called Real Time. And so Real Time is a 1-year research we've been conducting at Cooper with the generous support of a mega grant from Epic Games. And I'm sure you know Epic Games are the makers of Fortnite. And so part of our project was to use their software, the Unreal Gaming Engine, to think through architecture and curriculum tools. And part of the research is informing this exhibition and on a 1-day symposium that I just showed a poster of. And so the exhibition itself is kind of a real-time system in its own right, and I'll kind of define what that means in a second. But when we first started to work on this project, this term, real-time, really started to intrigue us. And so, you know, we know how kind of Epic is thinking about the term. For them, Epic is about marketing their product and their gaming engine as a sort of a real-time 3D visualization package to be used by architects and other professionals in the architecture, engineering, and construction industry. And so they're sort of touting its flexibility and its efficiency. And, you know, this is how they kind of talk about the impact it's going to have, that it's going to, you know, remove us from the tyranny of the endlessly spiraling V-Ray bucket, which will go the same way as the event horizon of the scanline renderer that came previous to it. But we thought that this term, real time, and the paradigm of real-time computation and visualization could address some additional concerns outside of just purely thinking about it within sort of the sphere of architectural 3D visualization. And so we kind of like trace it back to here, the semi-automatic ground environment. One of the first, a post-war military project, and SAGE, as it's commonly called, was a system of large computers and associated network equipment that coordinated data from many radar sites and processed it to produce a single unified image of the airspace over a wide territory. And so here we're seeing the control room there, and so it's this kind of like large networked infrastructure of data centers, of sensors, of human operators that surveyed this large kind of territory in North America, that brought it into spaces like this with human operators, and that collected all these signals in a way that sort of started to produce a single unified image, as I was saying. And then so part of what was kind of fascinating for us here is that this is actually the moment in which real-time computation, real-time digital computation has started to be invented. And so for us, we were kind of, some additional questions we were asking is, what does it mean if Epic's real-time platform is shaped by this example and the formation of real-time electronic computation through Cold War demands for centralized command and control over vast territories into a modular, flexible, and efficient manner. And so for our project, we also wanted to ask, what does it mean that our profession, our design tools, and our metrics for productivity is shaped by this Cold War logic? But we were also obviously, deeply fascinated by other sort of, global events. And so here we have a global media event where your favorite EDM DJ Marshmello is playing a live concert to, tens of millions of party goers. And obviously I can't talk about a concert in Fortnite without showing you what this looks like. But, we were kind of like really interested in where digital media experiences, virtual simulation, confront the economies of liveness. And just to kind of round up, we're also interested in how the design and planning of cities themselves are coming under a real-time procedural modeling paradigm, with examples like this, the city engine, where a level of detailed world generation logic that is all too familiar to gaming engine enthusiasts is coming into the domain of urban designers, planners, and architects. And so we're really thinking about how these tools of entertainment production are now becoming tools of design production, but are also used to produce digital platforms to manage cities, and that they're informed by military histories. And so this is kind of coming out of research, out of seminars we've been teaching at Columbia University and at Cooper Union, where students have been modeling here different kind of crowds within a protest, or thinking about infrastructures and waste management in different ways, or just the sort of, this one's just hilarious. If it's going to let me play it. Thinking about sort of the social context of some of the sort of algorithmic narratives about the future that are going around right now. And so the exhibition itself, you can see a plan of it here. This is where we're kind of collecting all the research from the 1 year work that all the students have been doing, is a kind of a real-time system in its own right. And so within the space of the gallery, we have 4 different chroma key rooms with live camera feeds on them. And each camera feed is going into a computer that is chroma keying gallery visitors into simulations within the Unreal Engine. And so when you kind of arrive in the gallery, you'll see both a kind of a view into a live simulation, and you'll see gallery visitors are situated into that simulation. And when you're in this kind of, in each of the rooms, you can actually, you can start to kind of manipulate and interact with some of the simulations that are happening in there. And so this kind of, if the exhibition itself is starting to sort of immerse participants in the algorithmic narratives that we've been doing research in through the studio and seminar work, the exhibition design also comes out of a long engagement with the codes and conventions of digitally mediated spaces that I've been working on here. And it's a collaborative project with Leah Dennis called Your Cribs from 2015.
Hello, and Welcome back to this series, which is about how to make a paperweight.
And so Your Cribs combines the culture surrounding YouTube videos and the early 2000 reality television program MTV Cribs, which features tours of celebrity homes. Like MTV Cribs, we broadcast a selection of domestic spaces, but by adapting the conventions of YouTube genres that inadvertently expose private interiors to the public sphere. And so we're kind of thinking about in this project, how does YouTube and other digital platforms frame domesticity? And so in our more recent project in this exhibition design, we're starting to think about, we're thinking about the frame in a different way. We're thinking about the frame in a space. And so in the space of the gallery, each of these like little 4 rooms frames a scenario, an algorithmic narrative, and a live simulation. And so you can enter into these narratives and you can kind of play with them and you're situated in there. And so this is kind of give you some more views of what that space looks like. And we've been kind of, starting to model some different kind of simulations. And so here we're starting to actually use agent modeling techniques to simulate how proto kind of humans within this Unreal Engine might interact with the environment. And then we're starting to also simulate urban systems that they're also interacting with. And this is a kind of situation where the scenario that is modeling of state where we're really all different types of products that are being designed for the city to kind of make it safer. And so we're using agent modeling techniques. And here we have the drone zone. So this is like looking at Amazon's new urban infrastructure that is starting to open up. And so these are hilarious actually. Yeah, this is like from the eye of a drone. And so this is all in Unreal, and actually all this data, you're over at Central Park right now. All of this data is getting pulled in from this is all GIS data that's coming in, and then we're procedurally modeling all of the textures for all the buildings and pulling that from zoning data using some of the tools in this ecosystem. And so this is kind of like the behavior tree that's driving the movement of the drones, that's driving the movement of the cars, that's driving the movement of the pedestrians in the previous scenarios. And so the reason why we're using agent modeling is that this is the method that's also being used by engineers, planners, technologists to model human behavior. Uber uses this for predictive modeling of surge pricing scenario. Security forces use it for simulations of crowds. Traffic engineers use it to ascertain the flow of vehicles. And a Google offshoot company that I'll talk about a little bit later is also using it to model the behavior and type populations of city residents. And so, our technique as always is to kind of use, our methodology is to always use the same techniques that are sort of being used by people who are making decisions on the future of cities, technology companies, city planners, city managers, and to kind of like use those same tools, those same software as an analytical tool to sort of pull apart how these things work. And so if we kind of go back now and we revisit the humanity trailer that we saw earlier, we now understand that the decision-making tree driving the behavior of all the humans within this simulation is driven by agent modeling. And so agent modeling also has a historical connection to military use. It's used in digital simulation to model friendly and enemy and artificial participants. And this kind of use of agent modeling comes out of a kind of a long history of what's termed in the military as serious games. And so that, serious games where we're using actually, gaming engines in a lot of instances where world building tools and behavior scripting is kind of being developed to be used for training and simulation and theaters of conflict type applications. And so there's a kind of like an interesting prehistory to military video games, and the mathematical and modeling and simulation of conflict using computers can be found in how this abstraction and probabilistic modeling of conflict was first developed in war board games with, games like this Tactics 2. There's a kind of like an incredible sort of fascinating history here where combat is coming into a statistical representation, territory is coming into a hexagonal kind of grid. You've probably seen RPG games kind of like this, and there's a, you know, an incredible sort of media kind of, a sort of a print media culture that's developed through publications like this. And so, you know, it kind of enters into the military with this early sort of war game that starts to validate a historical conflict, where information and data about a historical conflict in the Falklands is used and fed into a combat system that was actually originally developed for commercial spheres. And so this reciprocity where there's a kind of, you know, this example where an emerging gaming community and the military are starting to share tactics, models, personnel, and technologies is what I'm interested in finding out more about, what I've been kind of looking at. So this reciprocity is what I'm interested in tracking, as it allows us to see how many of the platforms and media we use for entertainment or tools for design have been influenced by this confluence. And, you know, so, you know, more recent example, this is kind of with Virtual Heroes, it's where the military has actually developed a game that they released as a kind of a recruitment tool, and it's been widely popular. So up till now, I've shown you how technologies that were invented for military use, real-time computation, sensing, command and control, have made their way into entertainment platforms and into the design of cities. I've also shown you partially how the opposite is true, how social cultures around gaming have involved military practices. And what this means is that these real-time technologies have become the interface through which violence is abstracted, normalized, and performed. And so I'm just going to show you some projects that are kind of like looking into that a little bit further. Ishan, the first let's one is pause it there. This is good. Thank you so much. Welcome back. So that's great, because we definitely thought all of this would fall apart before that video finished. So I think that's just like a testament to the robustness of some of the technologies we're using. And so we thought, like, in this, if that kind of gave you an introduction to some of the, I guess, the research and the prehistory of some of the projects and the techniques that I've been interested in, we thought in this second part of the talk, we could just kind of like, between Ellie and Tom and myself, we could just go to a couple of projects, and yeah, we could have more of a conversation between the three of us, and maybe we can also answer some of the any kind of points that you all had that got discussed with your critics before this talk now. So yeah, Tom and Ellie, what do you want to see? Which project was it?
Start with the one from the Sharjah Triennial, because the students, I think, looked briefly at that project. The first one, Media Habitat 75.
Oh, yeah.
Can I make one
Yeah,
comment
so
before we jump into a serious discussion of your work? Which is just like, if it wasn't obvious to the students, like, everything you see on your screen is due to some real-time computation. You know, so there's like the live stream of videos. There are the flight trackers, the location trackers, but also like the real-time rendering of the Snap cameras that Ellie and I have running on our heads. And, you know, so I think like your work spans the breadth of different ways that real-time computation, I think, play out. From, you know, both from the kind of side of simulation and rendering, but also media and the, you know, how media is instantaneous. So anyway, I just wanted to make a note of that this mess on the screen all relates in different ways to your work.
Thanks. And the dash cam's just become a bit more of a sky cam now. And because my arm was, real time's really heavy, huh? Yeah, so what you're looking at here is a project called Media Habitat, circa 1976, and it's a collaborative project with Felicity Scott and Mark Wasuda for the inaugural 2019 Sharjah Architecture Triennial. And so in this project, we're actually revisiting a historic film archive that consists of close to 200 films that were produced by country habitat that was concerned with human settlement. And so in the lead up to the conference, the UN invited participating countries to produce films that narrated what the nature of settlement and urbanization look like in their countries. And so it's like an incredible sort of film archive. And when we started to look through it, even though it kind of, the archive spans like countries like the United States and Western countries like Italy, it also has lots of countries from Africa and the Middle East, and so very vast different types of nations. But somehow, as we started to look at it, we noticed that within all the films, there was kind of certain patterns and sort of narrative structures that were repeating themselves in some way. And so you would always open up, with some kind of like vast sort of, beautiful landscape shot where you would be kind of like narrating traditional rural life, and it would be kind of, a chicken would sit in as a sort of a signifier for that tradition and for a sort of a more rural form of agriculture. And then as this kind of story crescendos to a kind of, the modernization of the state, we would kind of move towards industrial sort of agricultural production. We'd move to like new types of institutions being set up. And so we started to identify what we're calling tropes of developmentalism. And so the installations that you're seeing here is a kind of, it consists of 160 monitors with 80 Raspberry Pis, 8 Arduinos, 76 different buttons that you can press a button and it brings up 160 short video clips of a trope of developmental that we've identified. And so some of those tropes would be things like children playing, or Tom, you're gonna like this. Tractors is in there. Like, there's a lot of tractors that would always somehow, be used as a way to talk about a kind of certain type of agricultural culture. And so, this is a kind of we can kind of talk about this more, but like, it was a sort of a 1-year research project that turned into this, kind of incredible installation that in the end we took about 200 films and turned it into about 11,000 video clips. And so it's a two-way sort of system where at the top we had a set of buttons that were basically the countries. So if I pressed the country, it would show me all the tropes that country had. And if I pressed one of the tropes like children playing, it would show me all the countries that have video clips of children playing. And actually this just recently got acquired by the Sharjah Art Foundation. So it's kind of pretty spectacular that this really complex, large architectural installation has been sort of now coming into a sort of a museum acquisition process. And I don't know, like, I've had models sort of been taken by institutions, but this is the first time like something's been treated as not a sculpture but as a space, and that's kind of been very interesting to navigate as well.
Did you guys, this is a curiosity, separating all those films into video clips, did you use algorithms or did you do that by hand? Like, did you watch everything and parse it out?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we were trying, we tested different techniques. It turns out machine learning algorithms don't work so well on historic footage, and that could be like a project on its own. Like, they kept identifying cell phones that didn't exist. So yeah, and so I think like one of the things was just like it's historic film, and like the objects that those models have been trained to recognize aren't necessarily there, and so we think that like a calculator was a cell phone or something. But the second one is that what we were, like this thing that we were calling a trope of developmentalism, it was something that like we had to like, we were identifying what that was as we were like watching and viewing all of the footage. And so no, it was a team of about 6 to 8 Columbia graduates working for about 4 weeks. And so we sort of manually became a kind of algorithm ourselves.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, I think it's great. Like, I'm curious to hear you say more about, I don't know how exactly to put this, but like the image or the film or the video as a way to understand space and architecture. You know, like we're so used to in this profession, in our field, like reading drawings, reading measured documents, but it seems like there are lessons to be learned, not just about the films themselves, but also from architecture and space by kind of reverse engineering that understanding from a series of videos. So it's a theme that runs through your work, both kind of analyzing video and making video. So just want to hear you say more about the medium. You know, the medium is both a form of speculation and documentation.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I guess I would say that like the moving image kind of comes into my work a lot, but I would say the archive comes into it, you know, just as much. And so within this project, like what fascinated us was that this was like the first time, like the this kind of global conference at the UN actually like was sort of a media event in some way. And so at the UN, there were when you were participating in the conference, there were many viewing stations that were set up. And so the idea was the film would be used in some way for countries to narrate and to speak for themselves. And so film, like somehow architecture and settlement had become some sort of media event. And so when we were kind of visiting this archive, we were kind of interested in, why was it that these kind of narratives around how different countries were developing and what their economic modeling was and what the relationship to the UN was. And we kind of identified that somehow the UN within this was a kind of, I don't know, it's like the exhibition sort of looks like a control room. And so we were sort of thinking about the UN as a sort of a global control mechanism that was somehow through its media production practices was starting to develop certain types of narratives around how forms of life could come to be in these different contexts. And so I think, it's really important for us in here, what we were, doing is we were just making that logic somehow evident as an installation. And so we were working with the archival material, which in this case was film. And so what we were putting on display was not just that archive, but the logic of that archive and the logic of the UN that kind of surrounded it and informed the sort of possibilities of what development could look like at that time. And so I think for us, like I could kind of like I could do just what I did now. I could like tell you through a different medium what that logic is, or in this particular project, you could go in, you could push a button, and then for some reason there's 160 chickens looking at you from all around the world, and you realize that there's some sort of trope developing. And so I think like that kind of way of working with the sort of material and putting that on display, but organizing it in a different way is kind of a lot of, it's kind of what informed this project, I would say.
Important thing that comes up in this project, and maybe if this would be a way to segue to the control syntax projects that we read about in the eFlux piece for today, is thinking about like who controls the image, like who controls the format or who controls the medium, right? So because what you're pointing out, I think, in this project is the way in which like the state essentially has a way of like homogenizing or like producing these tropes, right, from like vastly different contexts and locations. And I was just thinking in the next project, or like the next set of projects, about the kind of differences that you call out between like the kind of software, like private enterprise software company versus kind of governmental agencies. And then just even maybe in our conversation, we can also think about something like open source and things which can be made by us, by the people, right? Because like even Unreal Engine that you're talking about is free to use by anybody, right? Like not something which has kind of centralized control. A way to segue to the next the projects. Ishan.
Ishan, can you please go to control syntax Rio? Thank you. what a treat for all of you. You get to see all these ones too.
Wonderful.
Just, yeah. Okay, yeah, if you go back a couple, thank you, to the start of this. Yeah, so this project, Control Syntax Rio, is a collaborative project again with Mark Wasuda. And it's an exhibition, publication, research project. You probably read a little bit about sort of the kind of larger context of the research in that eFlux article that we shared with you. And so I'll just talk a little bit more about the exhibition and design project here and try to touch on and respond to some of the questions that Ellie was just raising now, which is like really fantastic. I'd love to talk about that. And so the project is an exhibition that was originally staged at the Het Nooy Institute in Rotterdam and later came to Storefront for Art and Architecture. And it was looking at the implementation of smart city technologies by IBM within Rio de Janeiro. And so IBM and with the city of Rio, they created and constructed this new Center for Operations Rio, or it's kind of commonly called CORE. And the purpose of CORE was that in the lead up to the Olympic Games, the 2016 Summer Olympic Games, Rio, the city of Rio was trying to kind of, was trying to demonstrate to its global partners. This is going to have sound probably. Unless it's mute, that's okay. I think we can go back to the previous slide, Isha, and then, yeah, thank you. And so the core was built in 2016, and it was a sort of a new cybernetic sort of smart city, one of the most visible smart city sites, and its purpose was to help control the flow of traffic from Rio. And so we're kind of interested in how something that might seem as banal as traffic engineering is elevated to kind of urban politics when we start to think about what impact those systems of control, the systems of tracking, all this sort of saturation of the city with new sensor technologies, how that starts to impact, like exactly like how a kind of a commercial municipal collaboration starts to, circumvent what used to be sort of democratic processes around how we imagine the future of cities. And so what you're looking at now is a 40 meter linear long model, I would say, that is a path through kind of like what we're actually doing today. It's an actual path through the city of Rio. It goes from Copacabana Stadium, where the beach volleyball stadium was, to Maracana Stadium, where, and so it's a 16-kilometer journey through the city that's been modeled here. But it's also a path through the decision-making matrix of the smart city algorithm. So every time you turn, you're in a different part of the city and you're in a different logic within that algorithm. So it's kind of like moving through a physical geography and an informational geography at the same time, kind of like what we're doing in our talk right now, actually. And so, yeah, I think it was kind of an interesting project for us because we were sort of trying to, I guess, like map out a cartography of an emerging, what we're calling computational urbanism that's somehow being, ushered in by a sort of a new alliance of technology companies and city leaders. And then, so yeah, there's like, I think we can talk about smart cities and we can talk about how information and cities and different digital sort of technologies map onto each other and what the funding model for that is and what that means. I think all of that's really good. And then what we're thinking about in the model here was we sort of thought about this as a kind of a set, that the city is now being staged to be seen through new sort of surveillance networks. And so on the model's kind of got a network of security cameras trained on it that are sort of showing real-time feeds from that static model on a sort of array of monitors. And so things that like seem kind of banal, we're trying to understand what this surveillance sort of aesthetic looks like. Things in the model that are just like quotidian sort of daily life somehow become sensationalized when they get framed and pushed through a surveillance sort of aesthetic. And so, Ishan, you can kind of progress. And so we're also thinking about it, I don't know, like that famous sort of tracking shot from from Goddard film Weekend, where sort of the post-war.
Farzin, we've lost you momentarily, but I think what you're saying is this is an homage to Godard's famous tracking shot in Weekend, his film Weekend. Can you guys hear me talking about Weekend?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay, I'm back.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want me to give you an update to the dash cam?
Yeah. Yeah, we would. It looks
Okay,
like
wait.
your flight has just landed at JFK as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, so we can advance, and we can kind of go through a couple of slides more if you want, Ishan. Like the next project is control syntax. So this is photos of when it was installed in storefront. We can kind of go through this quickly. It's okay. Yeah, we can keep going. Yeah. So like, what is the urbanism configured through a crisis sort of mentality? What does that look like? And this is a second version of the project. We did a sort of a continuation, but this is control syntax Song Do here installed at the Maxi Museum in Rome, where we're kind of like looking at similar, we're looking at implementation of smart city technologies, this time in Song Do in South Korea, and this time by Cisco technologies. Interested in the sensor network. So this is documentations from all the sensors in Song Do. And in Song Do, we kind of thought that the logic was slightly different to Rio. The algorithm was really haunted by the fear of urbanity. You know, Song Do is a kind of newly built city. And so we can compress the entire city into a single intersection that's populated by compound traffic accidents that each narrate a different component of the smart city algorithm. And yeah, so this is where deer escape from Central Park. We can leave it on that, Ishan. Yeah, this model, like this is the world's biggest, tiniest model. Like I think you're looking at the deer are about 10 millimeters high or something. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Ellie, you're muted. I think.
Yeah.
Ellie, I think you're still muted. Don't know what's going on though.
Also, Ellie, I think you have a cat. Ellie, I think you have a cat on your head.
I mean, I want to give voice to some of the student questions, and this one is inspired by some questions from students, but with a twist by me. But I'm curious about like how to put this. It seems like your work focuses on both like regulation, either by governments or corporations, or just the human subject, like the regulation of our behaviors and our movements through cities, but also simulations. You know, like, and it seems to me that like the simulation is the outcome of regulation. You know, it's like if you're using agents in a piece of software, you give them rules and then you play out that simulation. And so in a way, regulation at the scale of a smart city is just trying to, not just predict, but produce the behaviors of human subjects, of urban subjects. So basically, city regulations are trying to produce behaviors rather than observe them. So I don't know. I'm just curious because a lot of your work is playing out simulations, but I know you make those rules. Like you are someone who designs through systems, but you're also studying these regulatory environments that, and surveillance environments that I don't know. It's just a thought on like, what's your position on those regulations? I think a lot of the students were curious or anxious about this new paradigm of the smart city as one being forced to more or less give over one's, subjectivity to a regulatory environment that would be increasingly good at not just predicting but coercing their behavior.
Yeah. No, it's like a really fantastic reading of the work, and it's a tricky question, right? And I would say, let me come to my position a little bit. I would say part of it is like no one really knows what the effects of the smart city are so much on, I don't know, urbanism. Like in some sense, like if you think about like what the images of the smart city are, it's always like icons, like little floating icons of apps effortlessly falling down from the cloud onto the city, right? Like if you, it's not like other sort of images or ideas for a kind of a urban sort of proposition where there's a kind of a clear diagram of what that is in some way. And so the smart city, it's the functionalist city with effortless, smooth, frictionless technology networks implement into it. That's the kind of, I guess, the claim, right? And the claim is that by optimizing city municipal services, that somehow, like this kind of trend that's been going on for many decades now, where there's been a sort of a public disinvestment in public amenities, but a kind of increase in public spending on securitization. Somehow the smart city kind of enters in this space to help manage, and optimize ever diminishing public resources, where there's but there's a kind of expansion of public demand, and so I would just say like the smart city is just like the latest version of how information in the city meet, right? Like before the smart city was the information city. Before the information city, it was like the eco city, or it was the knowledge city, or it was the cybernetic city. And like by the time we started to track the smart city, they've already sort of rebranded and it's named differently. Like Cisco's calling it, I don't know, like communities, and so there's a kind of constant branding of how information and technology and urbanism map onto each other. That you can kind of read the smart city in a long lineage in that way. And so my position is that, I think my job as an architect is to perform a spatial analysis of this rhetoric and of what's kind of touted as abstract systems and smooth, frictionless implementations of apps and technology from the cloud that land on the ground and onto the physical and material formations of a city effortlessly. And so that's why in all the work that we're doing, we sort of try to take these narratives, we try to take these algorithmic logics, we take these, very visible infrastructures, the sensors, and we can combine documentation with analytical speculation, but we do that all through sort of material formal practice. And so that's why, in some of the models you're seeing a bus exploding, and we've sort of 3D printed that moment where a bus is about to, has just kind of exploded. And that's because within the smart city algorithm, that's one of the, events that it's looking for. And so to kind of, exactly, to respond to your question, like if the city is now being managed by systems that are anticipating, that on a flat sort of plane of meaning, me walking down the street registers the same as a bus exploding. There's a kind of there's a sort of a sort of, I don't know, there's a kind of a crisis or a sort of a fear or of certain threats or sort of interruptions to the smooth sort of and to
You're back.
Can you hear me? Yeah, sorry, I don't know what you missed, but I'll just keep going. My Caitlin, who's driving, probably thinks it sounds fantastic, so she has it in her head and she can tell you the Cliff's Notes. But I was going to say, like, my position is to, I think like through discursive and form making and through critical sort of form making through a kind of a material formal practice, my job is to kind of produce an analysis of that emerging urbanism, and to do that in a way that materializes what's thought of as invisible or abstract forces, but those forces flow through material formal networks. And so, yeah, I think it's kind of.
Can you hear me? Because I think it's really important. I want to underscore something that you're saying, which is that I think what the work that you're doing is not merely about like documentation and making visible the invisible, but I think it's also thinking about the ways in which those technologies are shape the built environment, right? So it's not just that like Google Maps reflects the built environment as it is. It's that there's actually now a kind of feedback loop where the way in which Google Maps understands like calculates in real time traffic patterns and then maybe directs drivers to take alternate routes to get them there quicker actually changes the way in which the physical environment exists. Like it puts cars in places they wouldn't be otherwise. I mean, that's just like a kind of simple example, but just to say that like I think it's important that these technologies are not just about surveillance and about like capturing kind of real-time data, but they're actually impacting and affecting the way in which physical matter configures in space. Like those things are actually changing the built environment, I think, at a lot of different scales. And I think that that's one of the things that your work also kind of brings to our attention.
Speaking of, can I ask, like, since we know that Caitlin's phone is looking out your front window, and we know that you just crossed over the Hudson, and we know that Google Maps puts people in places based on their algorithm and traffic and directions. Caitlin doing this by heart, or do you also have Google Maps running somewhere to tell you where to go and where? Oh, it's the GPS. There you go. One more system. I didn't mean to make light of your question, Ellie, but more to make use of all the data streams we have here to illustrate it.
Yeah, and I would say Ellie, totally also a really great read, and I would say that the other thing it's doing is it's habituating the citizens of cities in relation to these technological systems. And so, we kind of, when we talk about a computational urbanism, we're also talking about computational subjects. Like it's exactly what your students saying, like those same very anxieties about, the freedom and paranoia that comes with kind of, new networks and media networks and thinking about sort of the saturation of tracking technology. Like if we really sat down and thought about it, I'm sure we'd have an existential crisis. And so, yeah, like we have all now formed ourselves, if traditionally the sort of architecture in the city somehow adapted to, we thought about it as adapting to human subjects. Now what we're sort of trying to show through our work is that we all as sort of informational vectors into the smart city have started, we've adapted to the smart city in some way. And so how those, like if we move away from thinking about the city as sort of a morphological, as a constellation of form and start to think about how buildings are sort of moving from being shaped by envelope and climate, but being shaped by sort of networks and different types of rules and regulations. All of that is kind of shaping our built environment, but it's also shaping the way we as residents live in it and think about it and how we see ourselves in relation to that emerging urbanism. Like look at you, Tom. Look at all the things on your face right now. You're doing that because Snapchat lets you. It's like
It's true. Yeah, all I have are the algorithms available to me. Will this one work? I'm not sure. Hold on.
And so I think we have like some really kind of amazing abilities as architects to synthesize all these different things and to visualize them and to not just render them visual, but to actually make them manipulatable to design. And so by being able to identify how rhetoric and algorithm kind of flow through the physical armature of the city, we can then start to shape that. And so I think like that's sort of why with the project we're doing at Cooper, with the real-time one, it's important for us to use the same tools that people are using who are designing the future of cities. And so I think there's a kind of a new sort of expertise that we can develop as architects, so we can, sit at those tables with the technology companies, with the city planners, and sort of start to advocate for the city in a way that's maybe sort of moved outside of our realm of practice.
Do you see that? Well, a two-parter. I mean, do you see that as the way that architects have agency? Well, so hold on, let me zoom out. So I think the students expressed a lot of familiar anxieties as like citizens, right? You know, our relationship to technology and privacy and the decision-making processes that determine our choices and options. Like those are all familiar and important anxieties. But I think students are also interested in the kind of agency and responsibility of the figure of the architect. You know, like there are a lot of people who are foretelling the end of the profession as we know it. But like let's just assume the architect as a operator in the world persists for at least another generation or two. Like, do you see the role of the architect as expanding the kind of rooms that one sits in the ways we have influence, in the ways that we can like help shape those technologies and protocols, or are there ways that like one's ability as an architect to like design buildings, like is there any agency left there in your mind? I mean, some students ask like literally about the envelope, if real estate logics are defining the like interiors and scales of buildings, a lot of time what we have left is like the street. This is another argument that's been made, but do you think there's any agency left at the scale of the building, or is it more just finding new ways to have agency?
Yeah, like I sort of like the first 10, also like really good question, and helps me like talk about like my last point where I was sort of trying to reflect and theorize on what this meant in terms of an expanded form of practice. And so my own journey for the first 10 years of my professional career, I worked for offices. I worked on large sort of multi-developments, multi-program developments, large kind of institutional and housing projects, and worked for a lot of some public clients, but a lot of also commercial clients. And so at some point, just for me, I was a little bit, I wanted to think about how architecture, like there's sort of, at that time, there was a lot of sort of formal and technological experimentation directed towards construction exuberance, let's say, and like new sort of fabrication and design and building techniques. And so I kind of like got interested in thinking about more sort of the longer narrative of how architecture and technology have come together. And I think because, within our discipline, there's a sort of a normative narrative around technology's place, and it's based around industrial sort of techniques, and it's based around some sort of media production, but there's a sort of a like a under-examined history of all these different like incredible sort of experiments with spatial media and sort of critical forms of practice that engage a sort of a political project within the discipline, that I think I sort of like look to those histories, and the work I do kind of works with that history in some way. And so I think it's not that there's a new agency that my work is sort of offering. I think like that role of architects working in these ways is a kind of a long tradition, and we can like look to figures, like I don't know, not necessarily my number one figure, but we can kind of like look to Le Corbusier, and we can kind of like look at his sort of media practice, and we can look to Buckminster Fuller, and we can look at all the different ways he's active within a sort of multiple fields of practice. And so I think like the agency of an architect is like sort of has many different spheres, and I think like training that, and today I sort of showed some video projects, I showed some exhibition projects. We're all kind of there's design projects. Like one of the sort of projects we did where we were analyzing how digital platforms were changing cities, and we were looking at sort of Airbnb, and we were looking at their sort of smartphone app. In response, we designed the smartphone app. And so I think like there's definitely like different types of projects, and there's definitely and so they might be new, like you probably wouldn't have designed the smartphone app 10 years ago. But I think that that way of working as an architect, experimenting with new spatial media, like thinking about the sort of political sort of context and the economic sort of business models of some of these types of project. I think like that's been, I think like expanding the discipline. And I absolutely think like buildings have a lot of importance. And I think, there's a lot of like folks who need new institutions and need new types of buildings to house those institutions that we can kind of work with. So I think rethinking, thinking about the client is probably maybe my ethical project in that, and thinking about the commissioning model of my projects.
Well, is there anything else you want to raise, Ellie, or another project we want to look at? Or we're closing in on 2:30, so maybe we should start to wrap it up.
Yeah, my phone's really hot in my hand.
Yeah, I think all our fans on all of our computers are revved up.
You look like this. This is what it looks like to me.
Uh-huh.
All I see is like, yeah, Tom, you have blue lips now, and Ellie, you are an anime character, I think.
Mm-hmm. Ellie, we can't hear you again.
Right onto the Cross County Parkway ramp to Rocks River Parkway.
I'm not sure if Ellie, can you chat if you're trying to talk? Can't hear you. Maybe not. Well, I guess we can call it an afternoon. Well, I want to thank you, Farzin, for making the time in the car. And who knows, this may have been the first multimodal media event lecture ever delivered from a moving car. We don't know. We can't be sure, but it's possible. So, so that's something. And this couldn't have happened, again, without Ishan in the background. So thank you, Ishan. And of course, Caitlin behind the wheel. So thanks to everyone and the students for great questions. I did my best to try to synthesize a bunch of very, I think, nuanced and complex concerns. So yeah, well, thanks again, Farzin. And yeah, well, oh, still can't hear Ellie. We can just hear a little bit. I don't know. It's fine. So, all right. Well,
thank you, everyone. Thank you for thank you for facilitating this experiment. It's, I'm really looking forward to looking back and seeing, looking at the video later and seeing all the different places I've been through these information systems. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
I would wave, but then you would lose both of my phones, and I'll just shake my head. Thank you so much.
Bye. Ishan, thank you.